Okay, so we've gotten a bunch of us nerds here together, and we are investigating one of Answers in Genesis's head honchos, Georgia Purdom, and one of her primary videos concerns the Noah's Ark and the flood, and all that good stuff. You can probably hear my dog barking in the background. So I'm here with Colton and Dakota, an engineer and, of course, a geologist, and they one completed one in training, but we're all in training here. We're all constantly learning new shit. So you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves, and then we're gonna get this ball rolling.
Okay, well, my name is Colton. You can find me on Reddit at CorporalAnon, although I don't post a whole lot of substance. As Erica pointed out, I am merely a geologist in training. I have about 2 semesters left until I have my bachelor's degree. I will be going further along to at least a master's, and hopefully we'll be getting into environmental geology as my specific subfield. I'm also a former Young Earth Creationist. I was very entrenched in a lot of the Young Earth arguments, especially pertaining to geology, which is where my interest carries over. And that's why I'm here. We're going to be covering some of the geologic misunderstandings of Mrs. Purdom.
That's very generous, Colton. All right, Dakota.
I'm Dakota, aka Deadly D 1001, and I'm engineer by trade. However, I'm more of a hobbyist on as far as the creationism, because I grew up in the middle of the Bible Belt, homeschooled. So even though my parents were vague deists and not creationists, I grew up and everybody I knew was creationist. My middle school books were the Exploring Creation by J. Wiles. So so it was a hobby that I took up and have maintained. But as I said, by trade I'm in engineering, so it doesn't often overlap with the creationism, but in a few cases I can actually provide relevant professional experience.
Oh, I feel like we're gonna have a great time tearing this to shreds. So let's just get this thing started. We're gonna kind of start with Georgia's video, which is gonna be linked in the description. We're gonna start at 8:43, where she talks about the 3 big issues.
Now, in my experience, there are 3 big, areas that people have questions about when it comes to the flood and the reality of the ark and the flood. And those 3 big areas, or the 3 big issues, are the ark, the animals, and the flood itself. Now, obviously, in 1 hour, I can't cover every question or objection that people might have, but I'm going to focus on those that I think are the major, so to speak, thing. And then we have an ark, okay? We have lots of resources that you can go to find out more information if you have specific questions. All right, so first of all, how big was the ark? Because it's not like we don't know, okay? We do know, because we have dimensions given to us in Scripture. So I wouldn't have a problem if you give them a scale model of the ark to play with, okay? Something that actually was actually, scaled down from the real thing. But this isn't it. This is not what it would look like at all, because we know that its length was 300 cubits, its width was 50 cubits, and its height was 30 cubits, okay? Now, then the next question is, what is a cubit? Because we don't use that term of measurement anymore. And a cubit is considered the length of an adult man's elbow to the tip of his middle finger.
Hey, which one of you 2 thinks has the bigger cubit?
I think I was slightly taller than Colton.
I feel like
I'm 6 foot, so...
Oh, okay, no, we're tied. So it depends on whether which of us is more torso and which is...
Plus, it depends which arm you're looking at, because I think my left is slightly shorter than my right.
Yeah, okay, so we've got these nice, succinct dimensions that Georgia's laid out for us here. No room for variability or wiggle room, thank God.
Depending on the guy, that size is obviously going to vary. And we don't know exactly what size of cubit Noah used, but we do know that in a lot of ancient big construction projects, so to speak, they typically use the long cubit, which is 20.4 inches. Sometimes it has a lot of different names, the royal cubit, the Hebrew long cubit. And so that is the cubit size we use to build Noah's Ark. So at the Ark Encounter. So when you use that cubit length, we do a little bit of math here. That means the length is 510 feet, its width was 85 feet, and its height was 51 feet. Okay, that is very different from those fairy tale arks, or those bathtub arks that we just saw.
You guys feeling the irony on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's palpable, right? It's not just me.
No, not just you.
Okay, good stuff.
Now you don't even have to imagine how big it is because you can go and see the real thing. And when people ask me to describe it, I usually just say massive because it is the largest freestanding timber frame structure in the world. Okay, nothing is bigger than this. And I'm always amazed. Like even when I was at the Ark the other day, I had some people tell me, well, it was really busy. There were a lot of people there. I didn't actually go on.
Press X to doubt. I've seen those videos.
Oh, it's always embarrassing when they talk about how crowded it is, and you actually look at the picture of the lines and the videos of whatever the skeptics go through. It's just always kind of sad to look at.
Well, the thing is, I've been there, and I mean, hey, credit where credit was due. It was a Tuesday, but it was also in July. So it wasn't that crowded. It wasn't completely barren, but it wasn't as big as they make it out to see.
Well, and the thing is, with something as controversial as the Ark encounter, there are videos all over the internet from all times of the year, and I don't think I've seen a single one that's showing like these bustling crowds that have been proposed. So, but hey, let's continue to give Georgia the benefit of the doubt. Come on, let's go easy on her.
To the Ark? I'm sure there was. They can all be on the Ark. Thousands of people, right? And if you're outside, you don't even see that. It's amazing. Like I said, they're kind of just like absorbed into the Ark. It's big enough for all those people. Its length is about a football field and a half long. Its width is about 2 school buses wide, and its height is about 3 giraffes stacked. Okay, so if you can imagine that, it's really, really tall. If you want to get an idea, just stand at the end of the Ark and look up. Okay, it's huge. It's about at the bow fin, which is...
Hit us with the first bow fin insult.
Okay, I fail to understand why they put what looks so much like a bulbous bow on a ship that has no propulsion. I think Answers in Genesis said they put it there because they think it's going to provide some sort of stability. But, that excuse aside, look at it. You know what it's there for. It's to make the ship look more modern, like modern ship architecture.
Oh, the whole ship is built modern.
Yeah.
Or the whole ship is built modern.
Although I can't even tell if that's the bow or the stern because they flip-flop kind of on which is the front and the back.
Stern is almost always the taller one, so that's probably the pointy bit's the bow.
Okay.
Maybe they also had to worry about like the classic Roman trimarines, and they needed to ram something maybe.
Yeah, all the other civilizations. Those Canaanites with their genetic engineering and their competing arcs.
Ooh, that demonic genetic engineering, though.
Battle on the high seas.
Mm-hmm.
All right, come on, Georgia, tell us some more.
It's about 10 stories up, so it is really, really tall. In fact, its volume is equivalent to about 483 semi-trailers. So you can put a lot of stuff in that Ark. Now, another way to get a sense of its size, is to compare it to boats that have been built in more modern times, like the Wyoming, which is about 450 feet long. It was a wooden ship as well. That's not quite as long as the Ark, but pretty close.
Okay, you guys. Now, I could have sworn that the two of you might have something to say about the nature of the Wyoming and the nature of the Ark and their structural stability.
Yeah, I mean, Bill and I brought it up very well, that the whole thing was leaking because it had so much flex in it. Built at the best of the day and had so much extra iron bracings and ties in it.
Yeah, it had like an iron skeleton, didn't it?
Yeah, not technically a full iron skeleton, but it had a shit ton of iron in it. Well, sorry if I need to keep this PG, but...
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah, but it had a lot of iron in it, and steel to hold it together. Flexing, it had full-time pumps running to keep it dry.
Right.
And it's not even that it was 450 feet. It was 450 feet if you include that big, long mast sticking out the front. Cut that off, it's an extra.
Yeah, I had that thought as she was mentioning it.
Right.
Yeah, it's almost...
It looks like the Ark in there, as they put it, is about 200 feet longer if you use a real honest measurement.
Yeah, so we're talking about something that's, a significantly smaller vessel that couldn't itself, with modern engineering, handle seaworthy.
And even then, I'm not so sure about the width of the Wyoming
Right.
compared to how they're saying how wide the arc is. My question, though, is if the Wyoming had all of these problems, this essentially implies that Noah's son, whichever one of them was the ironsmith, would have had to construct a durable iron backbone for this thing in order for it to survive. And I know that Answers in Genesis has their whole thing of you can't prove that they weren't super advanced with metalworking because it was pre-flood and they were so smart with genetic entropy or something of that sort. But realistically, you know this kid had been making tools and other basic iron structures at best for his whole life. And then his dad, his like 800-year-old dad, comes up out of nowhere. Hey, son, you need to build a ship's frame this size in the next 120 years or we're all going to die. So figure it out.
Just a father-son project. That it's for building bonds between the two of them.
And I don't know what they do in terms of pumps or anything like that, because I can't fathom that this thing wouldn't have leakage problems, especially with later design things that'll be hinted at later on.
Well, and in conventional science, we find, the way less durable pottery shards and freaking Herculean tools from periods of time that were, at least according to conventional science, way earlier than when Noah built the ark. But you're telling me that these metallurgy adept individuals didn't leave any trace of their abilities to metalwork at an ability that basically surpassed those in the 18 and 1900s? We just no evidence.
See, the thing about the flood is that it was supposed to wipe out all of human activity, and that's their gun they're going to stick to. That's why we don't find evidence of human mixing. Except they always contradict their own belief system with this, because then they'll go for things like, what's the one? It was like a Jurassic emerald finger or something I can't remember the name of the find, but it was like a big out-of-order fossil that they were picking on that Talk Origins had. And if I find a link, I'll put it in the description. So they still look, and every time they supposedly find Pauxi River tracks, anything like that, it's smack dab evidence for it. But the lack of evidence is always explained away with, well, God wanted to get rid of all traces of humans. Well, pick one.
Right. Well,
pick a side.
And the standards
can't get the small bits, apparently.
Yeah, apparently God can wipe out pre-flood oil engineering things or something, but he can't get rid of a few footprints that are mixed with dinosaurs.
He was cool with the footprints, but he really hated nails and screwdrivers.
Oh, of course.
That there's some cruel joke to be made there about God disliking nails.
Now, it's not as big as things like the Titanic or the Queen Mary II, which are steel boats. Well, why is that? Because this isn't a leisure ship, right? Noah didn't need golf courses and shuffleboard and pools. I mean, not saying that wouldn't have been nice, but that wasn't the point, right? It was a survival cruise. That's what I always say. It wasn't about leisure. It was about surviving, and it needed to be a cargo ship because it had to carry animals and their provisions and the water and all of those things. So they had a very different intention than the Titanic or the Queen Mary II. Now, research has been conducted on the dimensions of the ark to see how they were actually perfect for a cargo ship, because you have to take into account several factors like comfort, stability, and strength. And the ark really falls dead center in the middle of that triangle. It's the best of all three worlds basically combined that you can get when you have to take all into account.
I'm going to let you take this one, Dakota. Tell us all about how it's the perfect.
I just love the the deep technicality of this diagram. I would get serious talking to if I presented one of these for something like that for any of my projects.
Hey, it is for laymen, okay?
Yeah,
yeah,
it is for laymen, but
the background's like the Microsoft Paint color picker, like the triangle.
This is getting pretty.
Also, I like how now they're putting it for a box, is what it looks like. Like the ark was originally supposed to be.
Yeah, or some propose that it was like a I think it's a Canaanite vessel. Those they're like they're like baskets, right? They're like woven baskets with peat along the side to waterproof them.
Yeah,
And combustion engines, because remember, genetic engineering and stuff.
Of course. You got to keep all of the, there's got to be something for the Nephilim to ride in, right?
Oh my God, you're right.
I saw this putting it out recently, but you're talking about the combustion engines. What were they running the combustion on? Because I saw somebody else point out the pitch comes from oil reserves, which comes from dead animals.
They call the pitch as something derived from pine trees.
Yeah, like
because
a sap.
you can get like a similar resin thing, and that's what they write off the pitch as. But again, this is a case of them taking the historical context out of it, when in the Middle East people found oil deposits that were just bubbling up on the surface, and that's what they used for a lot of construction.
Right.
So that's what they were more than likely referring to. And then let's leave aside the fact that we can't know that the pre-flood tree kinds would have even been able to make resin, because perfect paradise, why would they need any of that?
Or that encased in quote-unquote pre-flood rock, the basement granite, you can find, I think it's not Archean light. No, I think it is. It's like Archean microbacteria.
For some reason, those are the only things that fossilized. Even though there are places that people like Andrew Snelling have said these are definitively sedimentary rocks that were laid down between creation week and the flood, and that's why you have stromatolites and bacteria. If this was where all fish and stuff are swimming around, where are the scales? Where are the shark's teeth? Where are the mosasaur teeth? The bones? Any of the shells? Because if you are identifying these as pre-flood deposits that survived, you can't say they got eroded away. So where is the evidence we would expect?
I don't think you can throw a rock on a beach and not hit a graptolite, right? Like the little serrated.
Especially in the middle of the nation.
Oh,
the
yeah.
United States. Yep. They're everywhere. And what's cool is you can actually you can go throughout places like Kansas and Nebraska, and you can see that the very specific ones, groups of graptolites, are laid down, stacked on top of each other. A hint, ecological zones go inland. They don't stack vertically.
Right.
So maybe the flood had some way to take an ecological zone that was 40 miles north and then just stack it back on top of the original. Who knows? Unknown processes. Who knows?
Monument to an Ancient Earth, shows us that that's invoked for the crinoids, right? These fields of crinoids, which, for the layman, a crinoid is, it's this organism that looks kind of like your hand. It's got a bunch of little appendages up at the top, and they're very
also for the nautiloids.
Yeah, nautiloids.
The nautiloids that Snelling loves so much.
It's a sea star with a tail.
Basically. Yeah. There
very alien facehugger looking.
Very alien facehugger.
Facehugger and a sunflower, somewhere between there.
Yeah, the nature deviant art phase. That's what we're dealing with here.
Oh, Lord.
All right, let's keep moving.
Because if it were taller, longer, or wider, it would break apart, it would tip over, or the people and animals would be so sick that they wouldn't be able to survive. And now I say, well, of course it's perfect, because God's the one that gave the dimensions for it, and he knew exactly what needed to be done. There was even a group...
If it was perfect, wouldn't we be using all the designs that we have today for seafaring vessels would resemble the Ark if it were dimensions?
I want to point out that if this is a perfect designed vessel, and you're dealing with a catastrophe that had hyper hurricanes, mega tsunamis racing back and forth continents, 40 plus mile an hour continental drift, asteroid impacts to explain the craters, a very violent event, why didn't God put in like an anti-capsizing feature that like modern lifeboats have? Like where if the boat even does get capsized, it immediately flips itself back over?
I like picturing this gyre in the middle that's just like a gyroscope, so it's kind of rigged. We could have had the son that did the metalworking, construct this gyre so that the boat's flipping. They're all cool. It's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, God. All right.
Group of Korean scientists back in the early 90s that wanted to do some modeling of the Ark to see if it would indeed be seaworthy.
I haven't been able to find a reference for this.
Modeling of the Ark to see if it would...
Well, those Korean scientists. What a weird thing
Maybe
to
I haven't looked
say.
for it. I don't know.
What an odd thing to say. You specify that they're Korean scientists and you don't link a source. Like that's just
being said,
George is
there's
an odd
a lot
bird.
of animals in the world today. Modern estimates as far as how many species are in the world, it's somewhere between 2 and 50 million, and it could be more than that. okay? But we don't really know. The number that I've sort of seen, I think is the most reasonable estimate, is about 8 million. Okay, that's sort of the settled upon number right now. Okay,
I did fact check her on that, and she's pretty. That's a pretty reasonable number to go by for modern species. I mean, but it's kind of easy for her to say that and then just ignore the conventional idea of biodiversity through time. I mean, she's just got this complete heavy bias to modern life, that just completely forgets about all of our. She mentions the dinosaurs, but we'll get to that in a second.
Got millions of species in the world. How could they all possibly fit on the ark? Well, let's answer that. And I have a threefold answer to that question. So the first part of that answer is, first of all, remember, he only had to take land-dwelling, air-breathing creatures. Okay, he didn't have to take any marine creatures because they've got plenty of water. And fish are actually quite speciose. There's a lot of species of fish in the world. So those numbers, that 8 million goes down significantly without marine creatures. Probably also doesn't include the insects. Okay, now I'm sure with all those animals on the ark, they had bugs. Okay, but the thing is that insects are technically not air breathing. So
huge pause, because Georgia honestly seems to think she's a degree holding scientist who claims to have expertise in biology, and she doesn't seem to understand that every terrestrial arthropod that we know of, engages in gas exchange. And most of them do so through something that's rather analogous to the lungs, the spiracles, little holes that line the side of the animal. So I don't know where it's just very convenient, because if you don't let the insects on the boat, you don't have to deal with, the mega sea scorpions or the griffin fly or arthropleura. Come on, Georgia. What do you take us for? A bunch of idiots?
In spiders, it's directly called booklongs.
It's directly called, yes, precisely.
I'm sorry, if you want to say they're not technically air breathing, drop a honeybee in a swimming pool and see what happens.
Exactly.
I've pulled enough of those. I've pulled the dead honeybees out of a pool.
Exactly. Yeah. Those poor little buggers are just trying to get a little drink of water. But yeah, wouldn't you know it? Not air breathing. Okay, Georgia.
Probably didn't include the insects. Now, even if he did have to take them, they're not going to take up that much space, right? Okay, probably fit them in a small box.
Again, arthropleura, griffin fly, sea scorpions. There's
the sea scorpion was at least somewhat marine.
Yeah, so. Yeah, that's true, but it was
now. Yes, but the problem is, if the point was that the point of the ark was to save all the animals, I don't know what kind of cruel god says I only care about the land-breathing animals, but the bees, the spiders, the sea scorpions, the trilobites, yeah, they can all just die.
Yeah.
I don't care about them.
They can go screw themselves. Yeah. The poor, our poor ammonoids, right? Like,
Hey, I like my ammonoids, man.
Yeah, they're cute. They're quirky. At least we still have Nautilus.
Why can't I have one of these little things just swimming around in like a fish tank?
Just bobbing around, minding their own business. Yeah, I mean, we can absolutely, I would love to get into, I'm sure we'll have this conversation once we get to geology, but the conditions, as you mentioned earlier, for any marine life, whether it's salinity dependent, depth dependent, acidity dependent, freshwater or saltwater, it is toast in every water body on the planet if there is a global flood. Yeah. That's just the way it's
not a good situation for anything.
Exactly. Drop a freshwater bass in the ocean and see what happens. I mean, but it's fine. And we sure do get freshwater fish quickly right after the flood, huh? That's very strange.
Quick enough that nobody notices the change.
Yeah, quick enough that, no one noticed. No one thought to themselves, oh man, like this lake that we had, there's just nothing in it. Okay. All right, Georgia.
So it's going to be okay, even if he did have to take them. But again, if you go to our insectorium here in the museum, and that's just a small, tiny fraction, right, of the different species of insects that exist out there. Beetles alone are like hundreds of thousands of species. So if you take that number, insects and marine creatures, out of 8 million, that number is going to dramatically go down. And again, the reason I say that it's just air-breathing, land-dwelling creatures is because that's what Scripture says. It says the birds, the animals, and the creeping things, okay, will come to you to keep them alive. That's it, okay, nothing.
Tell us about the creeping things once more, Colton. Tell us about who is involved with the creeping things.
So creeping things does refer to insects. You look in the book of Leviticus, it is talking about basically anything that doesn't fall into the category of cattle specifically, or beast of the land, which is a general term for most like mammals. So anything that isn't a bird or a fish, but is still on the land, that's reptiles, snakes, insects, any of the stuff that they considered living, which, I mean, you could debate whether or not they considered insects having the breath of life, but they're pretty clear that they consider insects the creeping things later on.
Sure, sure.
And I see no reason to insert that the meaning is different here, other than to get around specifically a young Earth creationist problem.
It's based off of convenience, because later too, a locust is considered a kind, right, of animal, and that's at least in some cases at the genus level. So I'm not. Yeah. She's going to mention here in a moment that family is the level for the biblical kind.
I'll let you handle kinds.
No.
Yeah,
now
I'm excited for it. All right, Georgia, let's get us there.
Number 2 is that he probably brought young adults, and I would say God brought the animals to him, and then he took them actually on the ark. The reason for younger animals would be because they take up less space, they eat less, and they produce less waste. So all of those things are good when you're talking a survival cruise with a lot of animal cargo. The other reason is because they would have the longest reproductive life after the flood. And that's what you want, right? You're to multiply and fill the earth. Well, you don't want to take really old animals that aren't going to reproduce much. You want to take really young ones. And again, we know that reproduction was in mind here because of what God says, a male and a female to keep them alive on the face of all the earth, okay?
I think it's important to note here that when she's talking about young animals, lots of reptiles and amphibians, and if we are going to include the insects, them as well, have various life stages that taking them on in their youth would reach levels of probable lethality. Like, you're not going to be taking the quote-unquote larval stage of tadpoles or newts or salamanders, any kind of temnospondyl on the ark. They require almost full submersion, you know. So
I also want to point out that her claim that most young animals tend to eat less, that ain't really that true. It's not exactly a good rule. My snake, when she was a baby, would eat a lot. And now she barely has to.
Right.
Any cats and dogs I've had when they were younger always ate a lot more when they were small. They had to, because their body is having to change. Whereas when they're like 5 or 6, their metabolism kind of slows down. So.
Absolutely. And I mean, the thing is that we can know actually quite a bit, as I'm sure you guys are aware of our knowledge on our assumptions and predictions that we can make about previous life that is at least analogous in some ways to the reptiles and amphibians that we have today, would suggest that they were similar in that aspect. They're experiencing this rapid growth in their juvenile stage, and then they slow down when they're adults. So,
oh yes, if you look at mosasaurs or ichthyosaurs in the fossil record, there are ways to check the inside of their bones for their thermoregulation, which would indicate how high their metabolism is. The more blood vessels you have in a bone, the higher the circulation, the more heat they have to let out. That's especially good for things that are horned. And then you also have, with ichthyosaurs and mosasaurs specifically, they had Benz damage in their bones. There's ways to see little pock marks that form as hydrogen gas bubbles in those capillaries, and it damages the bone structure. Animals that are slow moving don't get the bends because they're not going to be rapidly ascending and descending as they chase prey throughout the water, but that's what mosasaurs and other things did. So we know that at least some of these reptiles had very high metabolisms, and that gets even worse as you go to things like velociraptors and other sorts of dinosaurs. These things would have had to eat a lot.
I think too, it's important to note that for some of our larger mammals, we can tell their age as well, and indicate that they ate much more organic material when they were young. based off of their epiphyseal plates, right? The plates that are at the end of long bones at the epiphysis or diaphysis. I'm not sure. One or the other. All right, Georgia, tell us some more.
So that's what he was to do. Now, the last part of this question, which I think is this answer, which I think is the most important to understand, is that know how to take two of each kind, not two of each species, okay? And that word kind is repeated over and over and over again. Here, as well as in the Genesis account of creation, we see that word. Now, what is a kind? Just like we said, what is a cubit? Well, when you think about our modern taxonomy and the way that we classify things, kind is we usually would say that's about the same as family. So,
oh boy. Okay, kind is about the same thing as family. Oh, Georgia. So the family level, just for everybody's common information, here are a couple of families that would create a problem for that, because in a moment she's going to mention that the reason we use the family level is because this is the level at which there tends to be reproducibility, hybridization across, and that they look alike, which is bad criteria for anybody to use within animal families.
Well, if you ask a 5-year-old.
Yeah, well, if you ask a 5-year-old, yeah, exactly.
A dog and a kitten are the same family, obviously.
Yeah, giraffes and okapi, the Indri and the sheefark, orangutans, gorillas, chimps, and of course us, we all share a family, hamsters and rats, antelope and sheep, and foxes and dogs. And while she mentions in a moment that foxes, she brings up foxes and dogs as being in the same family kind of nonchalantly, but foxes and dogs certainly can't hybridize, not now. So their criteria... Yeah, their criteria for using the family level is strictly convenience-based.
Not even all dogs can hybridize.
Yeah,
African painted dog is genetically isolate,
or the maned wolf.
Isolate.
Yeah, the maned wolf is as well. So we're dealing with convenience for convenience's sake. But let's let her continue. Tell us some more.
Hopefully you all remember this from biology class, right? Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species is how we classify organisms. So we would say that kind falls at that family level, not genus and not species, okay? Not down here, not 8 million, but up here, which is significantly less at the family level.
Why would we say that? You know what I mean? Like why she said we would say that we're going to go ahead and do this at the family. Why? There is no empirical reason to say that this is the level that we're going to just arbitrarily pick, And
it really gets messy as you actually start looking at their literature, because you have people like Todd Wood who start pushing it back for certain groups to order, and then there's others who just can't get the data to match with kind being anything above a genus, and it's a real sloppy mess.
Right, and
I can give them credit for that. I mean, yeah, classification's hard, no matter what you're trying to do.
Sure.
But if it's inconsistent, at least say it's inconsistent.
Well, and part of it too is that these are the same people who, when you say, all right, well, biblically they didn't say that they took plants on the ark. Why are you saying they took plants on? And they answer, well, it's common sense. They're treating it like it should logically follow, but it's a total non sequitur. There's no reason to pick family, and you're right. Christians across the board will draw the line in different places for different lineages, which is not empirical at all. So, okay.
So just to give you an example of that, all dogs belong to the family Canidae. It doesn't matter whether you're talking foxes or wolves or coyotes or a chihuahua, they all belong to Canidae. Same with cats, okay? Whether you're talking a lion, a panther, a tiger, or a kitty cat, like you might have at home, those are all from the family Felidae. And the reason we say it's at the family level is because most members of a family, of the same family, can breed with one another and produce offspring. Okay, it's sort of a reproductive unit.
Okay, so then the reason is because it works for their model, right? This is the complete opposite of how anybody who would call themselves a scientist would understand the process to work. How can we force the data into our given conclusion? Oh, well,
just look at the statements of faith.
Yeah.
That they all have.
Yeah,
it's this idea of I absolutely cannot be mistaken about how I'm reading this text.
Exactly.
So anything that goes against it has to be wrong, definitionally, even if I can't tell you how.
Right.
Cut us some slack. We don't have the research power you do. We don't have the funding you do. Cut us some slack. Cut us some slack. Over and over. If you drill at these problems, they'll always fall back to that. We don't have the power you do. Why are you criticizing us and holding us to the same standard?
Why are you asking us to peer review? We shouldn't have to. That's not fair.
What do you mean peer review is more than spell checking?
Even that can get a little inconsistent.
Is members of the same family all kind of look alike, okay? Just like maybe your family, with your biological children and your grandparents and great-grandparents. There's similarities there, right? So you can kind of see that, oh yeah, those all belong to the same family. So there's a strong just presence of looking at them and saying that, as well as the fact that they can reproduce with one another. And
Okay, all right, let's think of some families, right, and how particularly they look alike. Where are you going to draw the line for the hyena days, right? Which ones do they look alike? Do they get their own family? Do they get their own kind?
I like weird cat dogs, man. Hyenas are weird.
Yeah, well, and they're more closely related to felids, even though they act more like canids. So it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I mean, and this is completely leaving out all of the bizarro town extinct families that we know and love.
Collicotheres are a favorite.
Where did the dog bears go?
Yeah. Where did the
bear dogs?
And those collicotheres are amazing too. What about Gorgonopsidae? What about our weird therapsid, hairless, canid niche filling 11.5-foot long carnivores go? And there's this weird thing too that I don't see brought up very often, where it's like the whole point is to preserve all this diversity, except like 99% of the species that were supposedly preserved in some sort of ancestral kind come off of the ark and disappear forever into oblivion. We never see the temnospondylus again. We never do see the collicotheres again. It's the oddest thing. No one ever mentions it.
We have some really good examples actually of this as what forms that family or that kind over at our petting zoo. So you need to go over there today and you need to see our Zorse and our Zonkey, okay? Now when you look at them, you're like, wait a minute, what is that? Kind of looks like a combination, which is basically what it is. These are what we call hybrids, right? So the brown one is a Zorse, and his parents, the parents there are a zebra and a horse. And then the Zonkey, of course, is a zebra and a donkey. Now, how is that possible? Because zebras, horses, and donkeys all belong to the family Equidae, okay? And they can mate with one another and produce offspring. Most of us are probably familiar with mules, okay, which is a donkey and a horse, okay? Same idea. And they all kind of look alike, okay? Even if you didn't know exactly what these were, there's some kind of horse, right? Something in that family, basically.
But she's painting this like that's what allows modern diversity post-flood to kind of emerge, this idea of hybridization, in which case you're starting with two and then they breed and then you get one more and then one more and then one more that are all reproductively isolated. Usually hybrids are sterile too, not always.
Yeah.
Not always.
All the fun hybrids are sterile.
Yeah, all the good.
Well, see, I mean, it probably is going to end up boiling down to these kinds that were selected by God. Instead of having non-coding DNA, that was all just unused alleles that weren't transcribed, so there was no like protein overloading, and then those were selectively picked out through guided recombination or whatever it is they're proposing now.
Isn't that like the heterozygosity?
Created heterozygosity by Jensen, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. So,
which his whole thing was just, without miracle, we cannot explain any of the genetic data. That was a concession.
And it was the same. It's interesting because you also see that with the rate team. I mean, we're basically reaching points where they're like, we're all about science until we're not, until it disagrees with what we say, in which case, oh, it's a miracle. There's nothing non-scientific about miracles. Why are you guys hating on the supernatural?
Yeah, man. Methodological naturalism is just bigoted. You guys just hate our conclusion.
Yeah.
No, that's not what it is. Because your version of supernatural doesn't make testable predictions.
None at all. And if they could, then it would be an appreciated field, across the community. But it's
boy, I would like to know if praying would actually make my sore throat go away. or something
Sure.
like that.
Well, actually, I mean, and I hate to say this, but there's actually been quite a few studies that show that there's sometimes a negative impact, you know, because
Performance
people,
anxiety.
yeah,
Yep.
performance
And
anxiety.
That's what the Templeton study found, which is hilarious given that, you know, it's a Christian organization and they put a bunch of money to get the biggest one of those studies published and finished.
And the argument I hear, I mean, we saw this from Paul, was just
Yeah.
you can't demand God to perform a controlled experiment. But here's the thing: we're not making a controlled experiment. We're doing a natural experiment, where what we're doing is saying, okay, we're going to sit back. God would logically be operating under these conditions with or without us here. Let's just observe if there's a noticeable difference.
We're assuming
And there isn't one.
regularity.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and you know, it's always the creationists that are getting on about this. It's never those who, you know, are religious and have their inclinations, who enjoy, you know, the benefits of science. It's never them, you know.
Well, we don't even need to assume regularity. We can measure stellar spectrums to get the laws of physics either haven't changed at all, or they've managed to change lockstep in such a way that they look exactly like they do nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
With the exception of the
Or you
split
can
second after the Big Bang.
Or you can use Lyell's anisotropic synchronization convention, or however it's called.
Yeah.
Where it's the idea that for some reason, God created the universe to look like galaxies get younger, less complex, stars have less metal in their spectra, further and further away. And that light, we're seeing it in real time. That light is instantly reaching us the second it's emitted from the star.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the same thing.
And yet in his papers, he argues against God being deceptive, as if God creating a universe that looks like it's gotten more mature over time, even though all that light is reaching us instantly, and this is how it all looks today, isn't deceptive.
Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing with these created kinds in evolutionary theory, right? I mean, we expect to see transitional forms in between larger lineages, you know, but when we see them, right, even though that's precisely what evolutionary theory predicts, it's a-okay in their mind to throw that out the window because that's just your world view, right?
Oh, yeah, see, because humans make amphibious assault vehicles, which means which means creationism predicted transitional forms all along. Of course, you can try to corner them on things like tiktaalik, where it's not just a transitional in general. We predicted specific features in specific rocks of a specific age in a specific location.
Habitat, yeah.
But the thing is, they can always say, well, God would create and could create anything. So anything is a logical prediction. Checkmate. I'm going to ignore the geologic usefulness of such predictions.
The long story short of this whole deal is that this is eventually going to come down to, yes, it looks exactly like it's evolutionary theory.
But what if no?
Yeah, but actually, I'm just right. And
actually, it's not actually. It's but actually.
Well, thanks.
Gotta get the lisp.
All right.
You know exactly what they were. You know, there's some.
Sorry, Dakota. Go ahead.
No, I was just going. Actually.
So Noah, you know, right now today we have about close to 400 breeds of domestic dogs. But Noah did not have to take 400 pairs of dogs on the ark. Okay, that's just ridiculous. Most of those breeds didn't even exist when Noah was taking animals on the ark. Okay, those have just come about in about the last 500 years. Most of these breeds have only been around for a short period of time. Again, they're just variations within the dog family. So Noah only took 2 dogs on the ark, and from those 2 dogs, after they came off the ark, they multiplied and reproduced till eventually we got lots of dogs. Okay, today. And they come in many different shapes and sizes, but they're all dogs, right? We've got jackals and foxes and the bush dog and the wolf and the coyote and your favorite domestic dog breed. Now, some people say, whoa, wait a minute. You're saying there was just 2 dogs and we get all the dogs we have today. I say, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
She's so sassy, you know?
Oh, I love it.
I love it. I mean, she shows all these pictures of dogs after just explaining that family is used in part because of this lack of reproductive isolation, and then she shows pictures of African wild dogs with, Canis lupus, as if these two are getting it on anytime they get the opportunity.
If you saw her put up bush dogs, holy shit, that looks exactly like a bear dog.
A bear dog, yeah, yep.
It is a. I pulled up pictures of it on Google Images. Holy God, this is a living transitional, as far as I can tell.
Does she? Hold on, does she use bear dog?
Yes, it's right there.
Different shapes and sizes, but they're all dogs, right? We've got jackals and foxes and the bush dog.
Nope, she calls it a bush dog. She calls it a bush dog. That's a sly move, Georgia. We know what you're doing.
And they say, but that's a lot of change in a very short period of time. It's just a few thousand years ago. I say, well, true. But let's think about this for a minute, okay? There's only about 35 dog species in the world, okay? You realize all these dogs that I'm showing you up here and the wolf all belong to the same species. They're all Canis lupus, okay? They're just different breeds of dogs. And there's a lot of variety among the breeds, right? I mean, you've got Great Danes. Well, I'm not that tall, but you've got Great Danes and you've got Chihuahuas, right? I mean, they look pretty different, don't they? Now, how is that possible? They've descended from the wolf, okay, through people selecting for certain traits, okay, and they keep breeding them back and breeding them back and breeding them back and getting dogs that eventually just keep producing dogs that look like Chihuahuas or bulldogs or whatever it may be. That's through people selecting and making those choices. People have been able to do that. In 500 years, we've gotten about 400 breeds of dogs.
So artificial selection. I mean, she's making, this is such a colossal mistake, Georgia. Go on.
I know.
Whoa. Okay, so what can happen in a few thousand years? Certainly you can get 35 species in a few thousand. I mean, that's a lot more time. And that's through nature and other mechanisms at work, not people selecting, but natural mechanisms that cause that to happen. So it's very, very reasonable. If we can produce a few hundred breeds, certainly nature can produce a few, dozen breeds.
Okay, Georgia. So here's something that's really important that she needs to understand is one, obviously the difference between artificial selection and natural selection, one of which is dozens upon dozens of times quicker. And the other of which is that breeding dogs, all of which using artificial insemination and the like can still interbreed, none of which are reproductively isolated from one another, is not at all the same thing as creating entire new genera of reproductively isolated canids that live all across the globe, from the Arctic fox to the painted dog.
Now, keep in mind the subtle shift she did there. What could happen in 2,000 years since the flood? No, not 2,000 years, 200 years max, because all written records that they admit are like right after post-flood, we're talking the book of Job and onwards, have modern species, not even modern genera, modern species. Written, you have hieroglyphs of them, you have paintings of them. So in 200 years, in the midst of a chaotic, environmentally shaking post-flood ice age, which is its own whole bucket of chuckles, these things are supposed to not only survive, but thrive and diversify this quick? I don't buy it.
And the domestication of dogs by conventional science is at least 36,000 years ago. I mean, this is a long relationship. So you're going to have to explain where domestic dogs and wolf hybrids and wolves are coming from, and it's fine that they want to say, okay, the radiometric dating doesn't work further back than 5,000 years. Okay, cool. Then how is it that we have domestic dogs at 5,000, 4,000, 3,000, 2,000, and so on and so forth, with a absolutely zero break for this hyper diversification event?
Oh, you see, because this was the strong point of genetic entropy. See, that's what it was.
Oh, of course.
This was massive genetic entropy that created rapid diversification and is now undetectable in any modern population at all.
Except cheetahs.
Except cheetahs.
Hey, man, the cheetahs have their own big thing with Toba, okay?
Oh, be nice to the cheetahs. They're doing their
I
best.
like them.
Be nice to the cheetahs. All right, Georgia, try to dig your way out of this hole for us.
Come on, sweetheart.
Species in a few thousand years. So it's really not all that unbelievable. God has created these animals with an amazing amount of genetic diversity. And you should feel sorry for the bulldog there too. I might mention, just read a paper recently, that breed is probably going to die out in our lifetimes. It won't be around anymore. We have bred it to the point that the poor dog cannot breathe anymore. It's too much. It's gotten too short of a snout and it can't even breathe. So,
insert comparison to human folly through artificial selection being reminiscent of natural genetic entropy.
Of course.
Well,
Of course.
Genetic entropy is creation CMI rather than AIG.
Yeah. Ooh,
Fair enough.
true. Well, almost, but I'm pretty sure replacing Darwin has some genetic entropy material in it, and that
Yeah,
was
but Jeanson doesn't get too much into it.
Yeah.
If you want to know a bit of an interesting backstory, you guys know that AIG and CMI used to be connected, right?
Yes, through back when they were all
Did you-
Australia located.
Did you read about how there was like some backhanded, under the table accusations of like Satanism going on between them or something? It got
No.
weird.
That is
Hang on.
odd. Ugh. Ooh. Now, are we sure that when they say Satanism, are they referring to like watching, Pokemon or That's a Raven as Satanism? Because I heard some of that in the church growing up. Or are we referring to legitimate?
It's possible. Let me see if I can find the link to it, and we can put it in the description for the
Yes,
viewers to
please.
see. Because
Absolutely.
it was astounding. And I wish I had thought of this before we'd done the recording, because I would have had a link prepared.
We'll do another one another time, and we can discuss the resounding variation of ethics that goes on in AIG and CMI and Creation.com and all those lovely lads out there. All right, I'm gonna let Georgia talk in the meantime.
So anyways, that's just what happens. Those breeds become so purebred that it can be bad for them. Now, back when we knew we were going to build Ark Encounter, when we first knew this was going to become a reality, myself as well as several other scientists had to get together and do a lot of research and figure out what is a reasonable estimate of number of animals for the Ark. And knowing that he took 2 of every kind and 7 pairs of some, okay, so we had to look at what then of all of the animals that are alive today and all of the animals we only know from the fossil record, okay, and take all of those and put them into their kinds, their original kinds. Whew, that's a big job, all right? And so many scientists were involved, and they published their papers in what's called Answers Research Journal, which is an online journal through the Answers in Genesis website. Anyone can go there and look at those articles, but I'm going to give you a summary of those. They are pretty fascinating to read. But as far as mammals go, there's about close to 550 kinds, birds, almost 300 kinds, reptiles, a little over 300 kinds, and then amphibians, about 250 kinds, which gives us a grand total of almost 1,400 kinds, or 7,000 animals. Okay, so that's all that was needed on the Ark. Again,
So Georgia is going to go into the dinosaurs here in a moment, but I think too that one thing that isn't considered that I've never heard them bring up is problems with gestational period, with some of our well-known mammal groups that they probably would have included, like the pachyderms and the Indracotherium and all of those guys whose gestational periods, at least in living pachyderms, is like a year and a half. So they're supposed to reach mastodon and mammoth levels by the time the Ice Age rolls around, which is, approximately 500 years, 600, something like that?
And keep in mind, all these Ice Age deposits, 200 to 400 years, depending on
200 to 400, okay.
But
Well, that's even worse.
keep in mind, you go to any of these Ice Age deposits anywhere in North America or Siberia, you will find meters-thick layers of mammoth bones. And in 200 to 400 years, with how slow those things reproduce, you're not getting that number of mammoths.
Well, and Colton, that's just including natural deposits. That's completely excluding the mammoth tusks and organic material used in human and genus Homo civilizations that hunted them, which is even more. They used these guys. I mean, this was like the multi-tool of the ancient world was like mammoth, mastodon. So, I mean, and there's no studies on any of this. They just throw things out there like, oh, it's fine, it'll work. And it's like, okay, what about the gestational period? What about our known populations in given periods of time in like the Neolithic era and later? Whatever, what do I know? Okay, Georgia, tell us about the dinosaurs.
If you're taking at the family level or the kind level, there's really not as many. Now, whatever you do, don't take those kind numbers and multiply by 2. Because remember, Noah had to take 7 pairs of some, the clean animals and the winged creatures. So that's why you end up with a lot of birds on the ark. Now, what animal, though, do you think I get asked most about when it comes to the ark? Unicorns. I like that one. Yep, that's one too. That was probably a rhinoceros though. But dinosaurs, okay, by far are the thing that people want to know about the most. Were dinosaurs on the ark? And I say, of course they were, okay, because what does the Bible say? Of every living thing of all flesh, animals after their kind will come to you to keep them alive. Well, that includes the dinosaurs. We know about them from the fossil record. They were real animals, living animals at some point. Now, there's lots of other animals that are also in the fossil record, okay? We get so excited about dinosaurs, we tend to forget that there was a lot of mammalian species that we know, or kinds that we no longer have around today. We try to show some of those at the ark so people understand it's not just dinosaurs in the fossil record. It's lots of other animals that no longer exist either. Now, there's plenty of room for them.
So here's the take home here. She half-heartedly throws the mammals in there. That's fine. There are a lot of really cool, Cenozoic mammals that we see, but she completely ignores. Let me get my handy dandy list of a few here, because where are the Brachiosauridae? These are massive temnospondyls, right? They're external gilled, larval instar periods, or life periods, not instars. They're not arthropods. Shigutasauridae, huge temnospondyls. Koolasuchus is a member of these guys. Rhynchosauridae, these guys are these beaked archosaur-like reptiles that no one knows about. And these are all family levels, not species.
I hate to interrupt you.
Please.
But I found it. So, with the CMI and AIG split, I found a link. It's going to be in the description for the viewers.
Tell us about this juicy.
I'm quoting it here. As of November 20th, 2006, documents posted on CMI's website were posted which let the causes of their split become known. The documents reveal surprising details of the Australian group's 1987 split with a co-founder, John Decay. So they had an earlier split with another group, and this is where that comes in. This 1987 split that happened earlier included accusations of demonic possession and necrophilia.
Necrophilia?
I forgot that was in there. But yeah, that happened.
Ken,
allegedly.
baby, what is going on?
I don't think it was Ken. I think it was Ken's group accusing CMI and Co. of doing that kind of thing.
Oh, you're in great company, Paul.
Oh my. That I honest to God think that's one of the strangest things I've heard all year. And the year's almost over.
Oh, here's more. Okay, CMI. Okay, so CMI was actually the accusers. I'm sorry, I got that split up.
Okay, so then Ken.
So this is AIG. Okay, you're right. Ken baby.
Ken.
Okay. CMI contends that a couple of the items that were brought to court show that John McKay accused Margaret Buchanan, who at the time was Ken Ham's widowed personal secretary, of being a demonically possessed practitioner of witchcraft, attempting to undermine the Australian organization that is CMI, and McKay in particular, as well as accusing her of practicing necrophilia.
McKay, up to no good. Oh
Yeah.
my God. Oh my God. That is one of the weirdest things I've ever heard.
Spicy drama that nobody talks about this.
Oh my God. The tea in the creationist fandom has been spilled.
Mhm.
Wow. Okay. Well, shoot. I don't even know if we can top that. I think that's the peak of this discussion. Honest to
No,
God.
come on. We got to keep going. We got to keep going.
Okay.
We
All
didn't
right.
get to the rocks yet.
Yeah.
Witchcraft and
We gotta get
necrophilia.
to the rocks. Anyways, so here are a couple of families that Georgia forgot to mention: the Silandidae, Dugongidae, Trichechidae, Shigutsaridae, Branchiosauridae, Brachiosauridae, Diademontidae, and the Gorgonopsidae. I'm gonna throw some pictures up as I say those in rapid fire because they're all really cool and they're all just families of
Even
the thousand.
I haven't heard of some of those.
They're so cool. You've got to look up Rhynchosaurs. They're bizarre. RHYNCHO SAR, Rhynchosaur. All right, we're almost to Mount St. Helens. I'm gonna skip the part where she talks about the local flood because we all know the argument for the local flood.
Straw man. She straw
Erect.
mans the entire thing.
It's just totally straw men. It's just there's zero representation of the original hermeneutics.
Or of any old earther's actual view, because God knows if you can't refute the view, straw man it, and then say that's their view and accuse them of lying.
Perfect. Yeah, for those of you out there who are curious about the idea of the local flood, or my personal favorite would be the allegorical interpretation, I recommend John Walton's The Lost World of Noah's
Definitely.
Flood. It's
Good
an
book.
excellent book. So
As Christians, we have a reasoned faith. We do not have a blind one. So in other words, we know certain truths from God's word, so we expect to see certain things in the world. And we see those things, and those things confirm and support that God's word is true, all right? So we should expect to see things like we're going to talk about in relationship to rock layers and the fossils, okay? And this is just two. There's a lot more, and we're only going to talk about a subset even within this. But let's talk about these as being major flood evidences. Now, probably many of us are familiar with geological timescales that look like this one, that the lower you go in the rock layers, the older that rock is, the older the fossils are, and as you go more towards the surface, the younger they are. And there's certain, fossils associated with different levels. Now, here's the question. Does it really take millions of years for rock layers to form, or can they actually form quickly under the right conditions? Okay, that really is the question that we have to address. So I'm going to show you a short video that talks about the Mount St. Helens eruption that occurred in 1980. And most of us in the room, maybe with the exception of the kids, remember that, watched it on TV probably, because thank goodness volcanoes don't erupt every day in the US. What we saw was that, wow, under catastrophic conditions, things like rock layers can actually form very, very quickly. So let's take a look.
On May 18, 1980, Mount St. Helens, located 95 miles south of Seattle, Washington, erupted. The eruption was triggered by an earthquake centered beneath the mountain that measured 5.1 on the Richter scale. The lateral blast swept out the north side of Mount St. Helens at 300 miles per hour. With temperatures as high as 660 degrees Fahrenheit and the power of 24 megatons of thermal energy, it snapped 100-year-old trees like toothpicks and stripped them of their bark. Before the famous eruption at Mount St. Helens, scientists were mostly familiar with slow-acting examples of geologic change.
There's so much wrong here. Geologists have known since well before Mount St. Helens that rapid geologic processes took place. During the 60s, there was a large debate about the channeled scablands and whether or not they were the result of an ice age dam bursting. And it was eventually concluded before Mount St. Helens that a big ice dam broke and a giant flood came through the area and completely reshaped the landscape. Similarly, we've known ever since the 1700s, and then going back even further than that, floods happen. We've seen volcanoes like Pompeii that people have known about all throughout history. These things have been known by geologists for a long time. Now, the reason that you see textbooks a lot of the time, at least in elementary school and middle school texts, to focus on these slow geologic changes is because that's what's most common. But most common events aren't actually what's always preserved in the rock record. Standout events tend to create more, And so those will be preserved preferentially, although it's still not anywhere as nearly as common as evidence of slow geologic change in the rock record. But
and those scablins too, just to interject, those scablins, it's a perfect example of what happens when there's a catastrophic local flood. I mean, the scablins are exactly the kind of catastrophe that creationists invoke for the formation of the Grand Canyon, and it looks nothing like it. It looks
it's a pretty slam dunk piece of evidence against the dam breach hypothesis.
Yeah, it's nothing like it at all. You know, you've got one carved deep channel that is the Grand Canyon versus the beautiful spread out, sprawled series of.
We'll get to that later when they compare it to the Little Grand Canyon. But the Little Grand Canyon, otherwise known as Engineers Canyon. But another thing that people really need to start understanding is that since about the 1950s, this idea of Lyellan uniformitarianism, where the vast majority of geologic processes are slow and they happen at a fairly reasonable rate, has been abandoned. That view was taken so seriously for a long time because the people who were backing it were locked in a debate with catastrophists, and nobody wanted to give each other any inch because they were afraid of their opponent taking a mile. So what happened around the 1950s, when that older generation of geologists basically died off, is people got a little sassy and decided to call the new modern uniformitarianism actualism, because it represents how the Earth actually behaves. And no geologist now, and for nearly 70 years, has considered slow geologic change to be the primary means of large deposits forming. What you tend to have instead is you have faster things happening on a local scale that is repeated. For example, you'll find stacks and stacks of turbidite currents that have been uplifted onto the continent. And those thick strata did not all form from very slow mechanisms. Instead, they were pulses of sediment falling off a continental shelf. Now, there are examples of slow-acting geologic mechanisms. Limestone formation being a big one. Limestone is one of those things that is almost guaranteed to be slow.
Hold on. Do you want me to play Georgia while I pull this up? These limestone stats.
You're welcome to, yeah.
Okay, all right.
But at Mount St. Helens, geologists watched the Earth's surface change quite rapidly. Icebergs were buried in hot avalanche material. They melted and formed badlands in days. Eruptions on May 18 and June 10 produced fine layers in hours. On June 10, mud flows cut zigzag canyons 100 feet deep in soft sand and mud, complete with perpendicular side canyons. And clearly produced within hours.
Hold on, sorry. Stop. Go ahead.
Okay. Comparing Engineers Canyon to the Grand Canyon is, I don't like to use rude language too often, but it's bullshit.
Yeah.
There are so many morphological differences between the two. It's insane. For example,
chemical, the whole, I'm sorry, go ahead. This is
for one, Little Grand Canyon, which I hate the term because it doesn't look anything like it, except to a layman who thinks that his layman's view is the actual view of things. It's cut into a single layer of ash. It's cut into ash that has laminations through it. It's not cut through separate strata. It's cut through soft sediment there's no lithification. The channel walls are gentle and U-shaped in almost all places because the sediment cannot support its own weight. It cannot form vertical walls. Compare this to the Grand Canyon, which is singular with very small offshoots instead of big, wide branches like you have at Engineers Canyon. It's deep, it's V-shaped, it's a lot bigger, and even with places with relatively weak rock like the red wall limestone, it is still strong enough to hold cliffs vertical for about 800 feet in elevation. This is not anywhere close to the same thing. This is not a miniature Grand Canyon. This does not look anything like it. This claim is just wrong.
I think too, you and I mentioned this previously when we'd spoken, but it's the difference between singular strata in Engineers Canyon, Little Grand Canyon, versus the myriad of different types of sedimentation that we see, and deposition and erosion that we see in the Grand Canyon. It's mind-boggling that someone would even make the comparison.
Yes. And Purdom's going to get to this in a second. She's going to take a picture of Engineers Canyon where there's laminations within these ash beds, and she's going to say, look at how different strata can form. This is wrong. Strata, definitionally, are distinct rock units that were not formed by the same event or process. So when you have strata, you have limestone, sandstone, granite, and other things interlocking on top of one another. When you have a single layer of something, of the same material, with little graded beds, that's called laminations. They're smaller and they're not strata. If this was cutting through strata like the Grand Canyon, then we should see different rocks stacked on top of each other. So it's not a valid comparison for yet another reason.
Yeah, for yet another. I mean, as if we needed enough. And speaking of the
and she's going to get to that soon, so you can just play through that.
Yeah. I'm gonna give the limestone stat really fast. But limestone deposits at an average of like 1.5 times 10 raised 15 centimeters, I believe. Yeah, no, grams of calcium carbonate annually. That's how many grams are deposited annually of marine limestone. So
there's a great book by Daniel Wonderly. He was an old Earth creationist. He's dead now. And it was called Neglect of Geologic Data by Young Earth Creationists in Their Writing.
That's so passive aggressive.
Ooh, it is a good book. And he mentions that for a limestone deposit to form, the ideal conditions that we can put under a lab, something that you find nowhere in nature, still says on the order of like 20,000 years for 2 feet of limestone to form. It's a very slow process.
Well, and those ideal conditions you're talking about, it's warm, calm, tropical waters, in shallow seas. This is not what we would see in this catastrophic.
And the creationist explanation for these limestone deposits is to say that they are hydrothermal or volcanic deposits. Same with evaporites too.
What, like travertine, like non-marine?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Which
you
is,
can find microskeletons in them, so.
I know, and that's what they ignore. And they do the same thing with evaporite deposits. They say that it's either hydrothermal or volcanic. And this is such an easy thing to falsify, because there is a whole host of geochemical signatures that volcanism and hydrothermal activity leaves behind. And in many of these massive deposits of both evaporites and limestone, you find none of it. None of it at all.
Yep. Oh,
so you'd have to fall back on the what if there's some unknown, undiscovered mechanism that makes it just look like we're wrong.
Yeah.
Is what they have to fall back on.
Every time. All right. Okay, Georgia.
Canyons that are reminiscent of the geography of Grand Canyon, only 40 times smaller and clearly produced within hours. Mud flows over the following decade cut hundreds of feet into solid rock in just days of cutting time. Fallen trees formed a log mat on the surface of Spirit Lake and dropped bark to the bottom of the lake, accumulating up to 3 feet of bark peat in just a couple years. And vertically floating logs sinking to the bottom of the lake resulted in buried trees in only a decade, similar to the trees of Yellowstone's fossil forest, which are also buried in volcanic layers.
Okay.
But
First of all,
take it away.
The fact that they went out of their way to tell their audience that these floods that happened and these ash flows and mud flows that happened after Mount St. Helens cut through hundreds of feet of solid rock, that is an outright lie. They cut through soft, unconsolidated sediment.
Which they said earlier in the video, too. I mean, they said the same thing.
Another thing. They have just invalidated the polystrat fossil argument. Again, for any creationists watching, nobody says that rock layers form slowly unless we find polystrate fossils. Nobody does that. Nobody assumes old unless they're old and slow unless there's evidence to the contrary. If you believe that, you're wrong. What we do instead is actually look at the rock itself, not even the fossil. And there are ways you can determine, if you look through the entire science of sedimentology, that can tell you whether a rock was fast or slow. You see graded bedding, you don't need a polystrate fossil. You see graded bedding, you know it was a rapid deposit, because that's what flooding and other things do. So when you see polystrate fossils, it's evidence of fast deposition, yes, but they've just provided a salient example of why a global flood is not the only explanation, and it's not needed whatsoever. The things that cause them are observed to happen today.
And you know, even with, as we mentioned earlier, with these enormous catastrophic localized floods that we see either over by the Mediterranean or back in the Scablands, you know, we can draw upon those, creationists could draw upon those to create models for what a global flood would look like, but they don't, because it doesn't show them what they want to see.
It won't predict the same data that actually exists in reality.
Precisely. So, all right, you want me to keep going?
Yeah, keep going.
Even though Mount St. Helens is a very small catastrophe compared to the flood, or the major catastrophes immediately following the flood, it provides a better clue to what happened in those times than the slow geologic processes which are most commonly seen in the present.
Okay, so what this showed was that under catastrophic conditions, you can get a lot of change in a short period of time. They showed these rock layers that were here. You see the person at the bottom for an idea of how big, how many rock layers are there. Those rock layers were formed in a matter of hours. It did not take millions of years. All it took was the right conditions.
Those are not rock layers. Those are beds of a single material. Beds are not strata. And soft sediment is not rock.
It's like you know, I mean, when you're in the scientific community, you tend to at least pick up a cursory knowledge of fields that have to do with your own. And considering she's a Young Earth Creationist who vies for Young Earth Creationism, you'd think
Snelling would have looked over this or something. But then again, that's Snelling. He's going to be honest about it either.
Snelling, the guy who abides by conventional geology in his published papers in regular journals, but not the very few
under the excuse that AIG doesn't pay him enough to be his only career, so he has to keep them separate. No. If they can build an ark, they can pay you comfortably.
I was gonna say, of course they don't pay him enough because it's all going into their freaking merch. Their merch.
They talked a little bit about this canyon. This is called Engineer's Canyon. It's 1/40th the scale of the Grand Canyon. It was cut out in 9 hours. That's all it took, right? It just took a catastrophe. Now, there's a little river that runs through that canyon. And I'm going to tell you right now, that river didn't make that canyon, right? Because we observed it in the present. It just took 9 hours to carve that out. Now, I would say the same is true for the Grand Canyon when you go there. Now, when you go there, they'll tell you the Colorado River carved that out over millions of years. Nope, it did not. There's no way. It would not look like that. It looks a lot like it happened very, very quickly, not that long ago. One of the evidences of that is the fact that the faces of the canyon are very steep, okay, and they don't look like they've been weathered away for millions of years, right? They're much more recent because they're the result of probably a post-flood catastrophe that carved that out in probably just a very short period of time as well. Now,
they don't look like they're weathered away.
Those sharp angles. They
don't look like they're weathered away. All of that loose, unconsolidated debris, all of those giant chunks of boulders that have been eroded off, all the sharp angles, all the stair-step-like pattern that solid rock makes instead of a smooth slope like unconsolidated sediment, you're gonna tell me with a straight face that shows no evidence of erosion? That doesn't look weathered?
She's confident.
Yeah, just if you just flick back and forth over the screen, just...
Also, can we appreciate how symmetrical the Grand Canyon is in a lot of places to the river, yet in Engineers Canyon, it's like barely even present.
Well, the river in Engineers Canyon runs in a valley at the bottom, whereas at the Grand Canyon, the edges of the canyon form a V with the river at the bottom, not straight down plateau, which coincidentally, the plateau nature that we see at Engineers Canyon looks just like the Washington Scablands, which would be a localized catastrophe. Georgia, what's going on? Hello, McFly. What is she doing? Oh my God. Okay, Dakota, you want to chime in here?
No, Colton. I have nothing that Colton didn't already say.
All right, let's go.
We find inside dinosaur bones, okay? Because it combines biology and paleontology, and so that's what I love about it. So this finding was first discovered sort of back in about 2005. I should say it's when it was really popularized. It had been discovered before that, but the more and more our techniques got better, people were able to see this. And so what they found, what you're seeing here is dinosaur soft tissue. So this is blood vessels right here. That's what these are. And the things inside the blood vessels are exactly what we would expect. These are red blood cells.
Okay, big fat pause. Georgia Purdom is just straight up lying here. And she has the audacity to put Dr. Schweitzer's link at the bottom to her paper, where she, in this exact paper, I'm fairly certain, if not this one, the one that follows, declares that these are not indeed blood cells in this structure here, but they're oxidized, they're framboids. Right?
Yes, she outright states one of the proposed things these structures could be are iron framboids that might be derived from iron from hemoglobin.
Right, but to say that these are platelets, that these little circles are platelets because they're round, what is she thinking?
And you go and you look at the biofilm paper that creationists hate so much. And they made an interesting observation when they looked at framboids in their biofilms. And they noted that iron framboids, when they're oxidized, will actually create a very red blood cell-like appearance. Because the inside will look dark. Yeah, the inside will actually look a bit darker. So if you're looking with a light microscope and not with an electron microscope, it's going to look like a red blood cell, but it's not. Yep. Looks can be deceiving. And I'm not saying that Mary Schweitzer has found biofilms. I'm actually of the stance, and most people are nowadays, that she's found something genuine. But there is still something to be said there. And when I emailed Mary Schweitzer and I asked, are these red blood cells? I asked her directly. She said, no. And after we found out that these things are more than likely framboids, we just moved on to the more interesting stuff.
Sure, and I actually just checked my notes on this, and it's actually in the 2006 paper that she...
I thought it was the 2006.
It is the 2006 paper I just checked, where she declares that these are indeed most likely framboids. But the fact that this video that we're watching right now was released in 2018, and they're using exclusively the paper that gives them the most leeway with calling this pliable, stretchable tissue, it's just not very forthcoming at all. You know, there's a 2006 paper, there's a paper 1 year later found in the same journal that tells us that these are very likely framboids by the author of the same paper they're citing here.
Do you expect them to be upfront with this? No.
I don't, but you'd think they'd be better at concealing it by now.
Well, the thing is, if this is the only smoking gun you have, you don't want to admit it's a really bad 22. You want to give the impression that it's a 500 Magnum.
There you go. Now, wait a second. Are you using inorganic comparisons to make an analogy, Colton?
Hey, I was going to make a comparison when she was talking about the whole nature could create kinds of like in 2,000 years or something, because look at how many we can make in a few hundred. This is like saying that because me and my excavator can remove 800 tons of solid rock in 2 days, this means that a river can do the same. It doesn't
follow. It doesn't follow. All right, let's get to the part where she shows us the stretchy video. I like that one.
Now, of course, when you see something like this, it's like, well, is it real or is it just an artifact of something that they did to the fossil? And so what they did was they did protein analysis of these structures to say, are they really what we think they are or not? Turns out they are, okay? They have the exact proteins we would expect to find in blood vessels and in red blood cells. And they have done a lot of research on this over the years to show what looks like almost fresh bone. I did a lot of work on bone biology for my graduate study, so I know what it should look like. And it looks, fresh bone looks a lot like this, only this is supposedly 65 million years old, okay? Some people even say that when they do this soft tissue analysis, it even has a smell to it, which is not something you would expect, okay, from something that is that old. It just should not be in this state if it's that old. And they found it in dinosaur bones that are much older than this, that are up to like 125 million years old. And they're finding it basically in every dinosaur bone they look at. All right. So how do they deal with this? Because these types of structures they know shouldn't be here after millions of years. So I want you to listen to Dr. Mary Schweitzer, who's one of the first scientists to really popularize this find and help people understand it. And listen to what she says about her discovery.
Not going to believe this. When she picked up a small piece to stop the reaction by putting it in water, it stretched and it sproinged and it moved all over the place.
All right, Colton, fill us in on the stretching.
So the stretchability is not something that means a whole lot, because these things are locked up in their natural state in apatite. So bone collagen is not free to be stretched, and it's mineralized. It's the same with osteocytes and other things. They only became soft and stretchy after they were put through a demineralization process, in which case the protein fragments, not whole proteins, they've not found whole proteins, they've only found broken pieces of them, in which those could be liberated and freed from their rock-hard encasing, and then they could be stretched.
Right. I mean, this is analogous to any kind of chemical transformative property that you can apply to something that is normally considered relatively solid. You know, I mean, that's the nature of the beast. When you apply chemicals, this whole thing, you know, the game changes. And she just got done saying, oh, well, is this just an artifact of something that they've done to the fossil? And then she shows something that wasn't, and then she changes the rules, and then she shows something that is. So, yep. Georgia, come on, if you're going to set down the rules, abide by them, you know?
I also like how they never show the Mary Schweitzer's dissing, you know, how much she hates the creationists and what they've done to her paper and her work.
Yeah.
I mean, that's gotta suck. You do your life's work, and you find this great find, and all you have is a whole bunch of creationists referencing you as if you're doing something completely that you're not.
She told me in one of my emails to her that she's been hostilely attacked by church members of different churches she's attended because she won't endorse the Young Earth view that these churches preach.
Oh yeah.
And they're like, well, your work proves it. And she's like,
it's my work. No, it doesn't. It's my work. I mean, and the thing is like, this isn't even the typical rhetoric that you get in academia, where it's like, oh, you know, it's friendly ribbing about your results. And, oh yeah, you see, that supports the social brain hypothesis or something like that. This is straight up laymen, some of which have not completed high school education, going up to a PhD and telling them what their work means.
Correct.
You know, I mean the sheer audacity of it. Okay, all right. Come on, take us home, Georgia. We're getting close.
So we knew we had something pretty unusual.
It appears to be soft tissue. When they look at neighboring parts of the bone, they're even more surprised.
Out popped the blood vessels, and they were pretty incredible. And I said, I don't believe it. That's not possible. We need to do it again and again. It's one of those just goosebump-inducing scientific moments. That's all I can say. And they don't really happen very often.
Blood vessels should not exist in fossilized bone. Many scientists believe organic molecules can't last more than 100,000 years. Yet Schweitzer's bone is 68 million years old.
Or is it? Is it really that old or not?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is 68 million years old. First of all, we have to break this down. What this argument is, if this was our only data point in isolation, if the only thing we had to judge the age of this fossil on was the presence of soft tissue, it could mean one of two things. It's younger than we thought originally, or our ideas and extrapolations about decay are somehow in error. I'm sorry, chemical decay kinetics are not anywhere near as solid as the laws of physics with radiometric elements.
The radiometric decay law is indeed, it's a mathematic law that has not been shown to be alterable beyond 1.5%. Went back in 1999, and this was not even concerning geologically important,
This was like you had to ionize it, and you had to like pump it full of like gold ions and all sorts of stuff.
It was so beyond any natural condition, and the maximum that they could get was 1.5%. And it was this study that I believe it was Woodenrap commented on and said, yeah, that's not going to cut it. He was like, that's not going to cut it. We need to start invoking some supernatural solutions to the problem. So
another few things with this, these decay experiments that are done, almost every paleontologist I've talked to concerning these finds seriously doubts them. And there's a good reason for it, because what almost all of these invariably do is they take a piece of collagen or several pieces of collagen, and they put it separated from bone, from its protective environment, in hot, acidic water near the boiling point, also exposed to the open air. And this still takes upwards of several months for them to get the data to show the actual decay equation. Now, we know for a fact that when you put collagen next to bioapatite in a bone, it acts as formaldehyde. It leaches away, it actually has the property of leaching away the chemicals that cells release to tell them to die.
Yeah, apoptosis, the program cell death.
So we have that working as a preservative that these things don't take into account. Obviously, bones are not in such torturous conditions. And the problem is, and Fazal Rana has a good piece on this in his like 2016 book, Dinosaur, Blood and the Age of the Earth.
Letter to Creationists has a nice article on this as well, which I like quite a bit.
Yes, you should link that below when you get the chance.
Yeah.
You get this thing called an Arrhenius breakdown, where basically if you make the conditions too severe and too unrealistic, it basically means the equation is completely invalid. And Mary has commented to me directly that the reason she doubts these is for all those reasons, but also because we don't know what these things have encountered. You can't just boldly assert that every condition that this thing could have possibly faced would have been negative to the survival. None of these take into account her iron mechanism, which creationists hate, and I get that. But the point is, it was unknown until Mary hypothesized about it and found that it works. Now, creationists want to say, oh, well, 2 years in a laboratory is nothing compared to 68 million years, and they're right, except for the fact that they're missing the point. The point wasn't to show that this thing somehow magically on its own explains 68 million years worth of preservation. It was to show that there is a mechanism that these decay experiments never took into account, which took a piece of ostrich collagen that went from decaying into an unrecognizable slop in 3 days to having no detectable decay at all under any reading after 2 years in the same condition. That's damn impressive.
It was something like 230 times slower.
Yes, they had next to no measurable decay, whereas the original one, the neutral, just got destroyed in like 3 days.
Yeah.
It was an insane extrapolation of it. So we don't know how this stuff can extend into the future, which means if we can't say one way or the other, that we have to let the whole cumulative data set tell us what the most likely hypothesis is. And I'm sorry, Young Earth Creationist, you don't get to sit there and say, all of these lines of data that interlock with each other must be wrong because of my assertion of this one data point. You have to accept you might be wrong.
Well, and that's not, if you're going to go around and propose an answers research journal and call yourself a scientist, then you have to behave like one. And that means that means rejecting the hypothesis when it no longer fits. That's what real scientists do. Even when it's your baby, right? It's like, oh, this hypothesis, you've been nurturing it forever. You got to throw it out if it doesn't match the data. There's no way around it. And I think too, I pulled this up because I was trying to figure out, I was kind of looking this up while you were talking, but I know Schweitzer had kind of mentioned that she'd been able to maybe isolate a bit of DNA. And the DNA that she got was from medullary bone that only forms in adult female theropods when they're laying eggs, because it's the same medullary bone we find in modern birds when they lay eggs. So if you're gonna take
the DNA thing is another thing they like to bring up.
But in the same DNA thing would be very harmful as it supports the non-avian dinosaur and avian.
Oh, not only that, the protein peptide sequences, the fragments of proteins they've been able to extract from these soft tissue structures. Not only do they match our predictions about dinosaur and bird relations to a T, which they can only dismiss as common design, but this whole DNA thing, the test she used would respond to it only required, I think, a minimum of 10 base pairs.
Yeah.
And it didn't even require them to be unaltered. They could be cross-linked around itself, making it much more durable than it is in its natural state, and it could still pick that up. And the cross-linking thing is another thing. These creationists act like we're finding, she even said, Purdom even said herself, this looks like fresh bone. It's not. There was a study that just came out this year where they looked at the dinosaur collagen that they had, and they compared it to chicken collagen that was put under experimental conditions reminiscent of the iron hypothesis, and it matched it to a T.
Yeah, it was the exact same process that
So
one would expect. It matched.
We're not dealing.
Send the prediction.
So we're not dealing with unaltered fresh dinosaur soft tissue. What we're finding are soft tissue structures, some of which, there was also another paper in 2018 that came out which showed that a significant number of them might only be structurally preserved, but not protein preserved, because the proteins are actually turned into a natural plastic through polymerization. Right.
Well, too, she mentions very shortly when we hit play here, she's going to mention that we're finding this. Oh, we're starting to find this in all the dinosaur bones. Oh my God!
That's just not a fact.
If only. That would be incredible. That would be amazing. We would be able to.
There's one person who can keep finding soft tissues in every dinosaur bone he picks.
Oh, we'll get to him later.
Only one person can do this.
Only one guy, and
only one miraculous, beautiful goateed, long-haired gentleman can continuously find it.
Our based god, our based paleontology god.
Yes.
So as a biologist, I worked a lot with DNA and tissues and cells. And trust me, even under pristine conditions, they don't last that long, okay? They don't even last that long in our observable time that we can see. So it's clearly a problem. And notice she says, I don't believe it. That's not possible. You need to do it again. Because they're like, no way. We know this tissue can't last millions of years, yet here it is. So what do they say? How do they try to deal with this in their worldview? They would say, well, look, it can last millions of years. Not, oh, maybe it's actually a lot younger, okay, which is what this would definitely indicate. They say, nope, millions of years is absolutely true, even though, again, that's based on their ideas about the past, not on God's word, who saw everything happen, was an eyewitness to creation, and inspired man to write that down. That's based on their ideas. They're going to keep on believing that in spite of the evidence, okay? They're trying to find a way that these things could be preserved over millions of years. Now, they haven't had much luck, and they're not going to, because this isn't plausible in a millions of years scenario. It's only plausible if these things are a few thousand years old.
Let's rag on that for a second. Which is absolutely what, Georgia?
Georgia, sweetheart.
Honey.
I love you. But I'm not assuming the Earth is millions of years old. And if you say, yes, you are, you're wrong. And I know that hurts, but you are. I feel convinced the Earth is old because of the overwhelming evidence supporting that idea. If you could show that evidence to be wrong, yes, I would come to your side in a heartbeat because I used to be on that side, and I would love to have that feeling of absolute conviction and that feeling of community and of God loving me back. But you know what? Maybe you should consider that when somebody is biased, but he's biased in your favor, and he still finds your case weak, that might indicate there's a problem with your case.
She hits us too with the she's like, oh well, the evolutionists, they say that this means that that the Earth is millions of years old and that, wow, looks like these things can preserve longer than we thought. She goes, which definitely isn't the case. Georgia, on what grounds is that definitely not the case?
Oh, she already said it. God witnessed it in the past. She already said it.
Well,
God said it.
her
That settles
assumptions
it.
about the Earth being young these are assumptions because priorities.
Yeah, because
Well,
convenience.
she's got God on her side. We don't, which I disagree with. But
Y'all have God on your side. I don't.
And
yeah, you filthy heretic.
And what about
My faith might be weak, but that is not a creationist problem. That is a theology problem.
Yeah, what about the rest of the what about the overwhelming majority of those who accept the age of the Earth and also evolution, who also claim to have God on their side? I feel like I've got God on my side. Georgia, what makes you better than me? You think you're better than me, Georgia? Bring it on.
Yeah.
So many creationists, like I bring up Francis Collins a lot of the times. I don't think I've ever seen a Christian as hated in Young Earthers.
Oh, people don't like Collins.
They don't like Collins.
Like,
they don't like him because he's
impressive.
Catholic too. Because apparently Catholics don't count for some.
I guess, but then you get the occasional weird Young Earth Catholic, and it's like, dude, your church already said that you're wrong.
You're good, dude. The Pope said it's fine.
And the Pope is guided by God. You can trust that God is telling you the right thing.
Stop stressing. The Catholics are good. The Catholics are fine. And you know what? Most of the non-denoms are fine too. It's you get the Southern Baptists. Ooh.
Yes, that was my old thing. Southern Baptist.
Yep.
And now I'm just sitting here, went through my atheist stage. Now I'm leaning back towards Christianity because I just never could shake that gut feeling that there's some truth to it. And I'm just like, Eastern Orthodox sounds pretty good. My family's from Poland. Maybe I should be looking into that.
Just lean into that history. There you go. Yeah, I mean, it's they don't like Dobzhansky either. They really don't like him, and they don't like what's the third guy? The Jurassic Park guy, the Pentecostal preacher. Backer.
Horner or Baker?
Robert Backer. Robert T. Backer.
Backer. That's what I thought. Yeah, they don't like him either, especially because he's
I'm not as good as names.
He's like a pastor too. They no likey. They don't like him. All right.
I think he said to treat Genesis as literal history completely degrades its eternal meaning.
I mean,
that's a great quote.
I think that is a great quote, and I think that's dead on. And I love I've seen, as you know, many Kent Hovind debates, and in my conversation with him, I got the same vibe. But Kent frequently, he's like, he doesn't like obeying the hermeneutics, and he doesn't like obeying the context and understanding the context of Genesis at all, because he claims, oh well, I've got to have you to interpret the Bible. And it's like, well, Kent, isn't that what you're telling everyone else they require from you?
Do I need to have you to interpret the Bible?
Isn't that what everyone?
Or furthermore, let's take this further. Well, if you think you have a good hermeneutic of Genesis that doesn't include a Young Earth Creationist view, then write up an article for the Journal of Creation so we can tear it apart. No, Paul, I don't need to run my stuff through you to feel convinced of it.
Especially because they think that these things are on the same level, right? It's like comparing philosophy to physics, right? One has a level, and they're both beautiful in their own way, but philosophy has much more of a subjective approach, and everybody can kind of come as they may. Whereas with physics, you can't just say what you think, right? You got to be able to back it up. So Paul needs some help. Paul needs some
Look, that's his organization, man. That's That's his paycheck.
That's the money.
I'm gonna expect him to go for it. My whole thing with the assertions, not just by him, but by every creationist, is we'll run it through our journals and run it through our experts and see what we have to say. Why? We've already been able to show that on basically every subject we can check, your journals are crap.
Yes.
You look at how bad Tompkins is. Every geology paper I see from the Journal of Creation, and I run it through other geologists, is awful. You look at Jensen, you look at any of this, you look at how Lyell misuses the astronomical data.
Snelling with the geological data.
I'm sorry, your journals are not the arbiter of truth. If I want to check my hermeneutical strength, I'm going to run it through an actual Christian college or something of that sort. One of their theology or seminary journals. Something like that.
Who understand the context of the ancient Near East, which is, you know, to think translation of words is hard enough. Translation of culture is damn near impossible.
Now try translating a dead language.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not going to happen. Okay.
At least
not very easily.
Like, Latin has so much stuff that's hard to do, and we've got so much extra more Latin than we do of any of the previous ones, and idioms.
Yeah, and you've got to run it through. Think of how many, you know, languages we've already been through and how we're still not 100% sure what we're doing. You know, to not allow for nuance is very foolish in my opinion. But all right, let's get to our boy here and then wrap things up.
Let's get to our favorite paleontologist. Yes.
Now, creationists have been doing research in this area as well, and this is an electron microscope image taken of a Triceratops horn that has been conventionally dated to be millions of years old, and they find these cells there called osteocytes. These are mature bone cells, and osteocytes have a lot of these little tendrils that come off to the sides. They're very fragile. They break very easily. I would not expect to see them in something that's millions of years old, okay? They just shouldn't be there. In fact, this shouldn't even look like a cell. It should just be totally obliterated because of the time factor there, and yet, there it is. And just to give you a comparison, this is the bone from the Triceratops horn, and this is fresh bone. It is actually very difficult to tell the difference because they do look actually quite similar. Again, not something you would expect if that bone is millions of years old, but if it's only a few thousand years old, you would definitely be much more likely to expect that, which shows that these fossils were buried as a result, most of them were buried as a result of Noah's flood, and they're just a few thousand years old. Now that's just two, and obviously there are many, many more that point to a global catastrophic flood that occurred just a few thousand years ago. So we talked time.
Let's do pause. You know,
okay.
Mark Armitage doesn't do what Mark Armitage does for Mark Armitage. Mark Armitage does what Mark Armitage does because Mark Armitage is Mark Armitage.
Yes.
This guy.
So with this osteocyte thing,
this guy.
and the little Philopoda, and it's like, I probably mispronounced it. He has gone on record, Armitage has gone on record and stated that he believes these are God directly, miraculously preserving them for him to find because these things are supposed to decay in days. Now, hey, if we're gonna be allowed to say God's preserving it for 4,000 years for me to find, I'm just gonna say God's preserving it so that way we can be in awe of his ancient creation. It's just as valid and it's just as non-biblical. But furthermore, I love the absolute lack of understanding, the just complete whoosh of these things are supposed to decay in days. Well, if they're there after several thousand years, that's going to indicate your decay models aren't that great.
Yeah, or you know,
you can't say the Bible's age is wrong.
Yeah, it's so then all of the decay models are bad. But the crazy thing is if this truly is, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say hypothetically, this is a Triceratops horn and we're finding osteocytes in it, which, for the record, we're not. But if that were the case, then we've got wildly different decay rates for every organism because we should be finding these osteocytes in everything, but we don't. So why is that?
And here's another interesting thing. You look at Mary Schweitzer's osteocytes, you look at the images she took, they don't look like this.
Not
They're
at all.
they're very degraded. They're very decayed. They almost look like debris.
They look like they've been desiccated. Is the thing. They look like they've been all dried out.
Desiccated, rehydrated with acid. They barely respond to chemical staining.
Yeah,
and like only a small percentage even gives some sort of signal. Mary's stuff, and this gets back to a problem of if it's 68 million years old, and they're saying it looks fresh, why are the actual examples we have confirmed not looking that fresh?
Exactly.
And now let's address this Triceratops horn thing.
Also, feel like there's also a slightly separate lie that I think I've heard. Didn't she just say that this has been conventionally dated to this strata?
Yes, she did say that.
Yeah, which we spent days trying to dig through these finds. They didn't do jack. They didn't do jack to actually really date this stuff or even document.
They wouldn't let anybody get their hands on it because they knew that it was. Tell us what it was, Colton or Dakota. One of you, fill us in.
So this horn, and I'm not going to call it a Triceratops because it's good evidence it's not, was not found by Armitage. It was found by I think Kevin Anderson at the Otis Klein Paleontology Group. If you don't know what that is a Carl Baugh type Young Earth Creationist ranch out in, I think, Utah. I could be wrong on the state, but Colorado, yes, sorry. Now, in their paper, when they gave the dig location for this, they used an old technique that is very good at concealing the exact location of it. It's an old backwards GPS technique. I can't remember the exact name of it. But it's used to hide where you actually dig it up from. They didn't do a stratigraphic analysis, so we don't know what rock layer this thing came from. There's no documentation of that kind of thing. They didn't get sedimentology of around it to check for groundwater contamination and other things. This horn was found in a secondary deposit. If you look at the images and you actually know what you're looking at, this thing has clearly been eroded out of a formation and redeposited in an empty space within that formation. Now, that doesn't necessarily imply that it's a Triceratops, because when you have a secondary deposit forming, something younger walking on that old rock can get buried in it. And that's where this interesting thing comes in. Erica's going to put a nice image up on the slide. And
credit to the late Bill Ludlow.
Yes,
the late great
Bill Ludlow. Oh. This thing looks like a bison horn, almost exactly. Triceratops horns almost never look like this. They tend to either be really short and stout. Yes, they either look really short and stout, or if they're big and long, they actually tend to curve up and then curve back out for a fighting position because they're fighting forward. Bisons curve up like this, and that's what Armitage has.
It's you're going to see this image. It's really incredible. It's exactly, if you had get a 5-year-old up and ask him to tell the difference.
A 5-year-old,
all right?
Yeah, so
I mean,
he says that this is a Triceratops horn, X to doubt. Nobody who was competent actually looked at this thing to see if it was, and he was so excited to find soft tissue that Armitage destroyed it without making a plaster cast for anyone to look at either, or even doing anything as simple as taking pictures of the whole thing, or getting a 3D scan.
When
or if he does, he hasn't released them.
When was this paper
2013.
2013. Okay.
Furthermore, it was in a light microscope journal.
This is
not a paleontology journal.
This is 2015. This paper she's linked is dated as 2015. So there is exactly zero excuse to not have better at least field pictures of this. Everyone's out there.
Yeah, the 2015 might be another light microscopy journal because he's posted a few of them in different light microscope journals.
No, this is in Creation Research Society quarterly.
Oh, this might be the iDino thing. Okay.
Also, one detail that Colton didn't mention in between all the other reasons why it's almost certainly a bison horn is if that is a Triceratops horn, it is a record-breaking long.
Yeah. So this horn came out to about 22. It came out to about 22 inches.
I don't remember the exact number, but it's
this horn is big.
Yeah.
And he even mentions in his 2013 paper that this would be the record-breaking Triceratops horn.
So imagine
But it's exactly the right size for an Ice Age bison.
Yeah. That North American megafauna. I mean, I don't understand.
Got extinctified, that got brought on the ark and then just fell over dead.
Yeah.
And the only response I ever see to this is, oh, well, he has like a nano Tyrannosaurus that he's finding the exact same things into. So even if he was wrong there, he's not wrong in this one. Who looked at it? Who confirmed that's a nano Tyrannosaurus? If you name a creationist, you're already wrong.
Yeah.
Take it to a museum, say, hey, I found this while digging. Can you tell me what it is? Have an actual expert tell you, oh, that's a nano Tyrannosaurus. I study these things all the time. If you don't do that, don't bother.
Especially if you're bringing to light these absolute trend-defying finds.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
If you're not, I mean, let's say that you went out and you solved singularity, right? If you don't run that by an astrophysicist, then you don't get to claim that you solved singularity.
But see, Kevin Anderson calls himself a paleontologist, which means it's basically peer-reviewed.
Oh,
Another thing,
sure.
remember how we were talking about Mary and how her extremely well-preserved Tyrannosaurus and her Brachiosaurus and all these other things have like next to no chemical response to things like DNA?
Yes.
Armitage has some videos on his YouTube channel where he's taking like blood vessels and stuff from this, and he's using like aridine orange or some other chemical to look for RNA staining, and it like lights up an orange glow if it's on RNA. The whole thing is covered with it. I have to ask, how are these extremely poorly preserved things lighting up with DNA for him, yet for extremely well-preserved specimens like Mary's, which are under the most ideal conditions you could get, she's finding next to nothing?
Well, we find we find almost entire organic breakdown in specimens that are preserved in amber. So you're going to tell me that we're getting these fresh samples from something that's sitting in the desiccated desert?
Let me see Armitage run his stuff by an actual genetics group who knows what they're looking for, who studies these all the time, or a paleontology group or whoever, and let them see, do these chemical stains match endogenous stuff? Because there's one thing I noticed, and I'm sorry I don't have a slide to show, but on one of his things, he was like showing RNA staining on a blood vessel from some sample he has. And there's a big ass air bubble in it. And the outside perimeter of the air bubble is also lighting up with RNA. RNA does not float in the open center of a blood vessel. It doesn't just stay there. That's a pretty big red flag for contamination.
Yeah, the whole thing just screams anatomically modern find.
Yes.
We're not looking at, and an excellent way to test this too, if you gave it to a geneticist, would be to look for mammalian markers. If you can pull RNA out of it,
why is he not checking
the mammal?
Oh, and you check his website, and this proves this dude is delusional. He wants to know if he can culture these Triceratops cells back to life.
Oh,
he wants to know if he thinks they're still alive.
Oh my God! What are his credentials? Does he have?
He's a chemistry dude.
So he was a light microscopy dude, and he got like a small chemistry degree, and he got a parasitology degree from the ICR's online school, which is such a high quality education. I like that ICR runs a parasitology. Yeah, that was my thought too. But that's a big thing for them, because why does God have all these parasites?
What about the thorns? Where can I get a degree on thorny plants? Where's the thorn botany degree?
Yeah. But I want to see just how see how much effort it takes to get a fake PhD from one of those. Because if I can do that, that would be great.
Go that high, because then you have to. I mean, I guess they could send you to a degree mill.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Colton. Here's why the Earth is young and why old Earth geologists are a big poopy head. Thanks for listening.
You're wrong.
I need to end it with thanks for coming to my TED Talk and see if I actually get my degree.
What's that donkey quote where it's like you are nitpicky and biased. I win. Bye bye. That's just creationists all the time.
Oh yeah. You look at the fucking creationist subreddit every time they pull up stuff. Oh my God. Oh, every time I see this stuff. It's always the same thing. It's always the whole, you can't tell me that God is a bad designer because you can't make a better design. And that's like telling me that if I get a pistol and I take it to the range and this thing blows up in my face, that what, because I'm not a gunsmith and I can't make a better design, I can't say this thing that hurts me is awful?
I mean, that's the same issue you hear with anybody wannabe film critics. Hey, have you made a multi-million-dollar blockbuster?
No, but you suck.
You can't criticize any movie ever made. Are you Michael Bay? Nope. You can't criticize any of his movies.
The argument too, they love to roll out their like the intro for Georgia in this exact video is like, oh, look at all her degrees, look at her argument, look at this pristine argument from authority, and then it's like gestures frantically to literally almost every other geneticist that's ever existed that disagrees, and it's like, argument from authority. That's a fallacy.
And I mean, you look at these degrees and it's like, okay, so what?
Yeah.
If someone who doesn't have a degree can tell you why you're wrong, that tells you your education didn't go very well.
Yeah, it really, I mean, golly, it's nice to have that to back you, sure, but if you can't make the argument without,
like, if you think I'm not gonna love,
yeah,
if you think I'm not gonna love attacking creationists when I'm like 45 and I've got a PhD under my belt and a bunch of papers, oh, you're wrong, because I'm gonna say I used to be one of you, then I got my degree, and you're full of shit.
Yeah.
Oh, that's gonna be great, but my arguments still stand regardless of that PhD.
Well, and the thing is all the PhD does is essentially it's given you years and years and years of time to contemplate this while attaining the PhD.
Yeah, which gives you an idea of whether or not this is willful ignorance or dishonesty.
Yeah, we could talk about that. I actually am corresponding with Jackson Wheat. I'm hopefully going to be on his show on the 27th, but he and RJ they apparently have conversations quite frequently about how sincere creationists really are.
Oh, I'm the one who sent RJ the Contested Bones book. I bought it for him. Yeah.
RJ's a cool guy.
I love him.
He's very artistic.
I love him. I also sent him our Dakota and I's post on how Anderson and all his different dinosaur bones that were carbon dated. And we found that Miller. Yes, Miller. It was Anderson. It was Miller and Anderson, because I know he was involved somewhat. We found that one of his bones, because I have an old copy of the first International Conference of Creationism.
Oh my God! Have you read that thing?
I've read parts of it for discussions with Michelle.
Yeah.
But we found one of Miller's old articles on his original carbon-14 dates on dinosaur bones. You know, the ones that had the shellac problem and everything? He redated that in 2014. And in, 10 years, 15 years, this thing aged 16,000 on a shelf?
Yeah. And this
it was so bad.
Dinosaur bone that then changed states when he kept sending the information to
Turchinsky, yeah.
So business as usual.
Yes.
Of course.
No reliability, and nobody pays attention to this because
no accountability either. It's just
there is no accountability system unless you're a necrophiliac, apparently.
In which case you get a big slap on the wrist.
Apparently.
All right, you guys. Well, my battery's at about 16%, and I'm scared to wander outside because my sister's having that holiday party. But I think this was quite fruitful. I just checked the video. Everything after this, I mean, we could get into chronology for the Tower of Babel and all that stuff, but honestly,
I don't know anything about that.
I mean, it'd just be me harping on about Egyptian history for 20 minutes, and I think we've done a pretty sufficient job already. So, but let's definitely do it again.
I'd love to.
Well, I'm planning on calling this 3 nerds tear answers in Genesis to shreds, or something along those lines.
I'm fine with it. We should do a Snelling video next.
Yes. Okay. All right. I'm going to let you guys go.
All right.
See ya. Thanks for coming on.
No problem.
Have a good holidays.
You too.
You guys. Merry Christmas.